Moment is upon us. Kairos has arrived. Welcome, everybody, to Demands Shadows. Here today we'll be continuing on, as we have been for the last several streams, with recording some more Frankenstein and completing, hopefully, our playthrough of Amnesia: The Dark Descent. To begin with, in our regular routine of housekeeping, we have a few nice updates, which you might be noticing already immediately, in that I have gotten some new additions to my mic. A new windscreen, a nice little foam cap, and one of those very dense fur-like coverings, so that we can hopefully not encounter any more of the strikes against the dynamic core of the thing. That should, with any fortune, mean that we have a lot less distracting or disrupting sounds, but it shouldn't affect the overall quality beyond that. We will see, though, and I would ask for any of you who have any inclination towards it to leave some feedback. I will naturally also be hearing the results myself whenever I edit the stream, and I look forward to the results. It's been very promising thus far. But, aside from that, everything else is more or less the same, and that all being done, let us then get on with the show. Now, with any fortune, we'll get quite a few chapters down, because it doesn't seem like they take very much in terms of page length, so we should be quite near to the end of the book. We are at page 155, starting with this chapter, and I'm thinking probably 20 pages we'll be able to knock out. Now, I guess I should append in that while the weather is beginning to stabilize here, we're still in that transition point between winter and spring, so hopefully we will not see so many difficulties as we have these last couple of streams, but please do forgive any intermittences thereabouts. It seems like we're also at the portion where Frankenstein's monster is not the primary talker, which should contribute to some greater ease. But let's get into it. Frankenstein, Part 7. Recorded, but did the same thing again. Read by Kairos, of the Threefold Manifold. March 11th, 2025. Chapter 17. The being finished speaking, and fixed his looks upon me in expectation of a reply. But I was bewildered, perplexed, and unable to arrange my ideas sufficiently to understand the full extent of his proposition. He continued. You must create a female for me, with whom I can live in the interchange of those sympathies necessary for my being. This you alone can do, and I demand it of you as a right which you must not refuse to concede. The latter part of his tale had kindled anew in me the anger that had died away while he narrated his peaceful life among the cottagers. And as he said this, I could no longer suppress the rage that burned within me. I do refuse it, I replied, and no torture shall ever extort a consent from me. You may render me the most miserable of men, but you shall never make me base in your... You may never render me the most... You may render me the most miserable of men, but you shall never make me base in my own eyes. Shall I create another like yourself, whose joint wickedness might desolate the world? Begone! I have answered you. You may torture me, but I will never consent. You are in the wrong, replied the fiend, and instead of threatening, I am content to reason with you. I am malicious because I am miserable. Am I not shunned and hated by all mankind? You, my creator, would tear me to pieces and triumph. Remember that. Remember that, and tell me why I should pity man more than he pities me. You would not call it murder if you could precipitate me into one of those ice rifts and destroy my frame, the work of your own hands. Shall I respect man when he contemns me? Let him live with me in the interchange of kindness, and instead of injury, I would bestow every benefit upon him with tears of gratitude at his acceptance. But that cannot be. The human senses are insurmountable barriers to our union. Yet mine shall not be the submission of abject slavery. I will revenge my injuries. I will revenge my injuries. If I cannot inspire love, I will cause fear, and chiefly towards you, my arch enemy, because my creator, do I swear inextinguishable hatred. Have a care. I will work at your destruction, nor finish until I desolate your heart, so that you shall curse the hour of your birth. A fiendish rage animated him as he said this. His face was wrinkled into contortions too horrible for human eyes to behold. But presently he calmed himself and proceeded. I intend to reason. This passion is detrimental to me, for you do not reflect that you are the cause of its excess. If any being felt emotions of benevolence towards me, I should return them an hundred fold. For that one creature's sake, I would make peace with the whole kind. But I now indulge in dreams of bliss that cannot be realized. What I ask of you is reasonable and moderate. I demand a creature of another sex, but as hideous as myself. The gratification is small, but it is all that I can receive, and it shall content me. It is true We shall be monsters cut off from all the world, but on that account we shall be more attached to one another. Our lives will not be happy, but they will be harmless and free from the misery I now feel. Oh, my Creator, make me happy. Let me feel gratitude. Let me feel gratitude towards you for one benefit. Let me see that I excite the sympathy of some existing thing. Do not deny me my request. Ooh, that's rough. I was moved. I shuddered when I thought of the possible consequences. I shuddered when I thought of the possible consequences of my... I shuddered when I thought of the possible consequences of my consent, but I felt that there was some justice in his argument. His tale, and the feelings he now expressed, proved him to be a creature of fine sensations, and did I not, as his maker, owe him all the portion of happiness that it was in my power to bestow? He saw my change of feeling, and continued. He saw my change of feeling, and continued. If you consent, neither you nor any other human being shall ever see us again. I will go to the vast wilds of South America. My food is not that of man. I do not destroy the lamb and the kid to glut my appetite. Acorns and berries afford me sufficient nourishment. My companion will be of the same nature as myself, and will be content with the same fare. We shall make our bed of dried leaves. The sun will shine on us as man, and will ripen our food. The picture that I present to you is peaceful and human, and you must feel that you could deny it only in the wantonness of power and cruelty. Pitiless as you have been towards me, I now see compassion in your eyes. Let me seize the favorable moment and persuade you to promise what I so ardently desire. You propose. Hmm. You propose. Hmm. You propose, replied I, to fly from the habitations of man, to dwell in those wilds where the beasts of the field... The perfect time for a car. To dwell in those wilds where the beasts of the field will be your only companions. How can you, who long for the love of sympathy of man, persevere in this exile? you will return and again seek their kindness, and you will meet with their detestation. Your evil passions will be renewed, and you will then have a companion to aid you in the task of destruction. This may not be. Cease to argue the point, for I cannot consent. How inconstant are your feelings? But a moment ago you were moved by my representations, and why do you again harden yourself to my complaints? I swear to you by the earth which I inhabit, and by you that made me, that the companion you bestow, that with the companion you bestow, I will quit the neighborhood of man. I will quit the neighborhood of man, and well as it may chance, in the most savage of places. My evil passions will have fled, sure, for I shall meet with sympathy. My life will flow quietly away. And in my dying moments, I shall not curse my Maker. His words had a strange effect upon me. I compassionated him, and sometimes felt a wish to console him. But when I looked upon him, when I saw the filthy mass that moved and talked, my heart sickened, and my feelings were altered to those of horror and hatred. I tried to stifle these sensations. I thought that as I could not sympathize with him, I had no right to withhold him from the small portion of happiness which was yet in my power to bestow. You swear, I said, to be harmless, but have you not already shown a degree of malice that should reasonably make me distrust you? May not even this be a feint that will increase your revenge? How busy night? How is this? I must not be trifled with. And I demand. Ooh, that's killing me. But just in time for another car. And I demand an answer. If I have no ties and no affections, hatred in vice must be my portion. The love of another will destroy the cause of my crimes. And I shall become a thing of whose existence every one will be ignorant. My vices are the children of a forced solitude that I abhor, and my virtues will necessarily arise when I live in communion with an equal. I shall feel the affections of a sensitive being and become linked to the chain
of existence and events from which I am now excluded.
I paused some time to reflect on all he had related. I paused some time to reflect on all he had related, and the various arguments which he had employed. I thought of the promise of virtues which he had displayed on the opening of his existence, and the subsequent blight of all kindly feelings by the loathing and scorn which his protectors had manifested towards him. His power and threats were not omitted in my calculations. A creature who could exist in the ice caves of the glaciers and hide himself from pursuit among the ridges of inaccessible precipices was a being possessing faculties it would be in vain to cope with. It would be vain to cope with. After a long pause of reflection, I concluded that the justice due both to him and my fellow creatures demanded of me that I should comply with his request. Turning to him, therefore, I said, I consent to your demand, on your solemn oath to quit Europe forever, and every other place in the neighborhood of man, as soon as I shall deliver into your hands a female, as soon as I shall deliver into your hands a female. As soon as I shall deliver into your hands a female who will accompany you in your exile.
I swear,
he cried,
by the sun and by the blue sky of heaven, and by the fire of love that burns my heart, that if you grant my prayer while they exist, you shall never behold me again. Depart to your home and commence your labors. I shall watch their progress with unutterable anxiety, and fear not but that when you are ready, I shall appear.
Saying this, he suddenly quitted me, fearful, perhaps, of any change in my sentiments. I saw him descend the mountain with greater speed than the flight of an eagle, and quickly lost among the undulations of the sea of ice. His tale had occupied the whole day, and the sun was upon the verge of the horizon when he departed. I knew that I ought to hasten my descent towards the valley, as I should soon be encompassed in darkness, but my heart was heavy, and my steps slow. The labor of winding among the little paths of the mountains, and fixing my feet firmly as I advanced, perplexed me, occupied as I was by the emotions which the occurrences of the day had produced. Night was far advanced when I came to the halfway resting place, and seated myself beside the fountain. The stars shone at intervals. The stars shone at intervals as the clouds passed from over them. The dark pines rose before me, and every here and there a broken tree lay on the ground. It was a scene of wonderful solemnity, and stirred strange thoughts within me. I wept bitterly, and clasping my hands in agony, I exclaimed, "Oh, stars and clouds and winds, ye are all about to mock me."
Ye are all about to mock me. If you really pity me, crush sensation and memory, let me become as naught. But if not, depart, depart, and leave me in darkness, and leave me in darkness, and leave me in darkness. These were wild and miserable thoughts. Let's give that a retry. Oh, stars and clouds and winds, ye are all about to mock me. If ye really pity me, crush sensation and memory, let me become as naught. But if not, depart, depart, and leave me in darkness, and leave me in darkness. These were wild and miserable thoughts, but I cannot describe to you how the eternal twinkling of the stars weighed upon me, and how I listened to every blast of wind as if it were a dull, ugly sirach on its way to consume me. Morning dawned before I arrived. Morning dawned before I arrived at the village of Chamonix. Morning dawned before I arrived at the village of Morning dawned before I arrived at the village of Chamonix. I took no rest, but returned immediately to Geneva. Even in my own heart, I could give no expression to my sensations. They weighed on me as a mountain's weight, and their excess destroyed my agony beneath them. Thus I returned home, and entering my house, presented myself to the family. My haggard and wild appearance awoke intense alarm, but I answered no question. Scarcely did I speak. I felt as if I were placed under a ban, as if I had no right to claim their sympathies, as if never more might I enjoy companionship with them. Yet even thus I loved them to adoration, and to save them, I resolved to dedicate myself to my most abhorred task. The prospect of such an occupation made every other circumstance of existence pass before me like a dream, and that thought only had to me the reality of life. Chapter 17. I thought I heard a car coming. In chapters in chapter 17, at the apex of Victor's monster's story, we finally conclude with the demand for a partner. The demand... I have moved the mic since I've readjusted it. The demand for... The demand...
the demand for an equal, and in exchange for that monster to quit, all of human interaction, all of human society, in pursuit of a peaceful and agrestal life among the wilds of the world. But in that, despite the claim that all of the vices and follies of this monster, despite the claim that all of his vices and follies were a result of his exclusion therefrom, and its consistency with the story he had told at length, Victor hesitates. And for the very valid reason that if he should fulfill these promises and his creation is being dishonest or changes his mind later, he might find himself I really hope that the activity quells here after a bit. He might find himself not only being the progenitor of one who has already expressed the ability to murder and destroy, but two, and from there, who knows how many more. But finally, after the solemn oath of his creation, he agrees, and his beneficiary vanishes, to leave him returning home with a new goal, with a new quest, and much less of himself. I don't know if this chapter being so short really requires very much response. No, I think we can continue right away. Chapter 18. Day after day, week after week, passed away on my return to Geneva, and I could not collect the courage to recommence my work. I feared the vengeance of the disappointed. I feared the vengeance of the disappointed fiend, yet I was unable to overcome my repugnance to the task which was enjoined me. I found that I could not compose a female without again devoting several months to profound study and laborious disquisition. I had heard of some discoveries having been made by an English philosopher, the knowledge of which was material to my success, and I sometimes thought of obtaining my father's consent to visit England.
to visit to visit England for this purpose, but I clung on. And another vehicle. Is it a holiday? It might just be because people are finally getting out after being shut up for the long winter. But I clung to every pretense. It's not the cars, it's the racked voice. But I clung to every pretense of. And then the moisture management. But I clung to every pretense of delay, and shrunk from taking the first step in an undertaking whose immediate necessity began to appear less absolute to me. A change indeed had taken place in me. My health, which had hitherto declined, was now much restored, and my spirits, when unchecked by the memory of my unhappy promise, rose proportionably. My father saw this change with pleasure, and he turned his thoughts towards the best method of eradicating the remains of my melancholy, which every now and then would return by fits, and with a devouring blackness overcast the approaching sunshine. At these moments I took refuge in the most perfect solitude. I passed whole days on the lake alone in a little boat, watching the clouds and listening to the rippling of the waves, silent and listless. But the fresh air and bright sun seldom failed to restore me. To some degree of composure, and on my return I met the salutations of my friends with a readier smile and a more cheerful heart. It was after my return from one of these rambles that my father, calling me aside, thus addressed me. I am happy to remark, my dear son, that you have resumed your former pleasures, and seem to be returning to yourself. And yet you are still unhappy, and still avoid our society. For some time I was lost in conjecture as to the cause of this, but yesterday an idea struck me, and if it is well-founded, I conjure you to avow it. Reserve on such a point would be not only useless, but to draw down treble misery on us all. He trembled violently at his exordium, and my father continued. I confess, my son, that I have always looked forward to your marriage with our dear Elizabeth as the tie of our domestic comfort, and the stay of my declining years. You were attached to each other from your earliest infancy. You studied together, and appeared in dispositions and tastes entirely suited to one another. But so blind is the experience of man, that what I conceived to be the best assistance to my plan may have entirely destroyed it. You perhaps regard her as your sister. Without any wish that she might become your wife. Nay, you may have met with another whom you may love, and considering yourself as bound in honor to Elizabeth, this struggle may occasion the poignant misery which you appear to feel. My dear father, Reassure yourself. I love my cousin tenderly and sincerely. I never saw any woman who excited, as Elizabeth does, my warmest admiration and affection. My future hopes and prospects are entirely bound up in the expectation of our union. The expression of your sentiments of this subject, my dear Victor, gives me more pleasure than I have for some time experienced. If you feel thus, we shall assuredly be happy, however present events may cast a gloom over us. But it is this gloom which appears to have taken so strong a hold of your mind that I wish to dissipate. Tell me, therefore, whether you object to an immediate solemnization of the marriage. We have been unfortunate, and recent events have drawn us from that everyday tranquillity befitting my years and infirmities. You are younger, yet I do not suppose, possessed as you are of a competent fortune, that an early marriage would at all interfere with any future plans of honor and utility that you may have formed. Do not you suppose, however, that I wish to dictate well, let's go back to the start. Do not suppose, however, that I wish to dictate happiness to you, or that a delay on your part would cause me any serious uneasiness. Interpret my words with candor, and answer me, I conjure you, with confidence and sincerity. I listened to my father in silence, and remained for some time incapable of offering any reply. I revolved rapidly in my mind a multitude of thoughts, and endeavored to arrive at some conclusion. Alas, to me the idea of an immediate union with my Elizabeth was one of horror and dismay. I was bound by a solemn promise, which I had not yet fulfilled and dared not break, for if I did, what manifold miseries might not impend over me and my devoted family? Could I enter into a festival with this deadly weight yet hanging round my neck and bowing me to the ground? I must perform my engagement, and let the monster depart with his mate, before I allowed myself to enjoy the delight of an union from which I expected peace. I remembered also the necessity imposed upon me of either journeying to England, or entering into a long correspondence with those philosophers of that country, whose knowledge and discoveries were of indispensable use to me in my present undertaking. The latter method of obtaining the desired intelligence was dilatory and unsatisfactory. Besides, I had an insurmountable aversion to the idea of engaging myself in my loathsome task in my father's house, while in habits of familiar intercourse with those I loved. I knew that 1,000 fearful accidents might occur, the slightest of which would disclose a tale to thrill all connected with me with horror. I was aware also that I should often lose all self-command, all capacity of hiding the harrowing sensations that would possess me during the progress of my unearthly occupation. I must absent myself from all I loved while thus employed. Once commenced, it would quickly be achieved, and I might be restored to my family in peace and happiness. My promise fulfilled, the monster would depart forever. Or, so my fond fancy imagined, some accident might meanwhile occur to destroy him and put an end to my slavery forever. These feelings dictated my answer to my father. I expressed a wish to visit England,
but concealing the true reasons of this request, I clothed my desires under a guise which excited no suspicion, while I urged my desire with an earnestness that easily induced my father to comply. After so long a period of an absorbing melancholy that resembled madness in its intensity and effects, he was glad to find that I was capable of taking pleasure in the idea of such a journey, and he hoped that change of scene and varied amusement would, before my return, have restored me entirely to myself. The duration of my absence was left to my own choice. A few months, or at most a year, was the period contemplated. One paternal kind precaution he had taken to ensure my having a companion. One paternal kind precaution he had taken to ensure Interesting structure, that. One paternal kind precaution he had taken to ensure my having a companion. Without previously communicating with me, he had, in concert with Elizabeth, arranged that Clerval should join me at Strasbourg. This interfered with the solitude I coveted for the prosecution of my task. Yet at the commencement of my journey, the presence of my friend could in no way be an impediment, and truly I rejoiced that I should be saved thus I should be saved many hours of lonely, maddening reflection. Nay, Henry might stand between me and the intrusion of my foe. If I were alone, would he not at times force his abhorred presence on me, to remind me of my task, or to contemplate its progress? To England, therefore, I was bound, and it was understood that my union with Elizabeth should take place immediately on my return. My father's age rendered him extremely averse to delay. For myself, there was one reward I promised myself for my detested toils, one consolation for my unparalleled sufferings. For myself, there was one reward I promised myself from my detested toils, one consolation for my unparalleled sufferings. It was the prospect of that day when, enfranchised from my miserable slavery, I might claim Elizabeth and forget the past in my union with her. I now made arrangements for my journey, but one feeling haunted me, which filled me with fear and agitation. During my absence, I should leave my friends unconscious of the existence of their enemy, and unprotected from his attacks, exasperated as he might be by my departure. But he had promised to follow me wherever I might go, and would he not accompany me to England? But he had promised to follow me wherever I might go, and would he not accompany me to England? This imagination was dreadful in itself, but soothing inasmuch as it supposed the safety. This imagination was dreadful in itself, but soothing inasmuch as it supposed the safety of my friends. I was agonized with the idea of the possibility that the reverse of this might happen, but through the whole period during which I was the slave of my creature, I allowed myself to be governed by the impulses of the moment, and my present sensations strongly intimated that the fiend would follow me.
and exempt my family from the danger of his machinations. It was the latter end of September that I again quitted my native country. My journey had been my own suggestion, and Elizabeth, therefore, acquiesced. But she was filled with the disquiet. But she was filled with disquiet at the idea of my suffering, away from her, the inroads of misery and grief. It had been her care which provided me a companion in Clairvaux, and yet a man is blind to 1,000 minute circumstances, which call forth a woman's sedulous attention. She longed to bid me hasten my return. 1,000 conflicting emotions rendered her mute, as she bade me a tearful, silent farewell. I threw myself into the carriage that was to convey me away, hardly knowing whither I was going, and careless of what was passing around. I remembered only, it was with a bitter anguish that I reflected on it, to order that my chemical instruments should be packed to go with me. Filled with dreary imaginations, I passed through many beautiful and majestic scenes, but my eyes were fixed and unobserving. I could only think of the bourne of my travels, and the work which was to occupy me whilst they endured. After some days spent in listless indolence, during which I traversed many leagues, I arrived at Strasbourg, where I waited 2 days for Clairvaux. He came. Alas, how great was the contrast between us! He was alive to every new scene, joyful when he saw the beauties of the setting sun, and more happy when he beheld its rise and recommence a new day. He pointed out to me the shifting colors of the landscape and the appearances of the sky. "This is what it is to live," he cried. "Now I enjoy existence. But you, my dear Frankenstein, wherefore art you desponding and sorrowful?" In truth, I was occupied by gloomy thoughts, and neither saw the descent of the evening star, nor the golden sunrise reflected in the Rhine. And you, my friend, would be far more amused with the journey. Of Clairvaux, who observed the scenery with an eye of feeling and delight, than in listening to my reflections. I, miserable wretch, haunted by a curse that shut up every avenue to enjoyment. We had agreed to descend the Rhine in a boat from Strasbourg to Rotterdam, whence we might take shipping for London. During this voyage we passed many willowy islands and saw several beautiful towns. We stayed a day at Mannheim, and on the 5th from our departure from Strasbourg, arrived at Mayence. That feels like the right pronunciation. We'll see. Majas? Mains? Apparently comes from Celtic. Let's look up that.
Mayans. Okay. We stayed a day at Mannheim, and on the 5th from our departure from Strasbourg, arrived at Mainz. Arrived at Mayans. The course of the Rhine below Mayans became more picturesque. The course of the Rhine below Mayans becomes much more picturesque. The river descends rapidly and winds between hills, not high, but steep and of beautiful forms. We saw many ruined castles standing on the edges of precipices, surrounded by black woods, high and inaccessible. This part of the Rhine indeed presents a singularly variegated landscape. In one spot you view rugged hills. Presents a singularly variegated landscape. Presents a singularly variegated landscape. In one spot you view rugged hills, ruined castles overlooking tremendous precipices, with the dark Rhine rushing beneath, and on the sudden turns of a promontory, flourishing vineyards with green, sloping banks, and a meandering river, and populous towns occupy the scene. We traveled at the time of the vintage. And heard the song of the laborers as we glided down the stream. Even I, depressed in mind and my spirits continually agitated by gloomy feelings, even I was pleased. I lay at the bottom of the boat, and as I gazed on the cloudless blue sky, I seemed to drink in a tranquility to which I had long been a stranger. And if these were my sensations, who can describe those of Henry? He felt as if he had been transported to fairyland. And enjoyed a happiness seldom tasted by man. I have seen, he said, the most beautiful scenes of my own country. I visited the lakes of Lucerne and Uri. And another one. Oh, pretty close. I have visited the lakes of Lucerne and Uri, where the snowy mountains descend almost perpendicularly to the water, casting black and impenetrable shades, which would cause a gloomy and mournful appearance, were it not for the most verdant islands that relieve the eye by their gay appearance. I have seen this lake agitated by a tempest, when the wind tore up whirlwinds of water, and gave you an idea of the what the waterspout must be on the great ocean, and the waves dash with fury the base of the mountain, where the priest and his mistress were overwhelmed by an avalanche, and where their dying voices are still said to be heard amid the pauses of the nightly wind.
I have seen the mountains of La Vallée and Pas de Vaud, but this country, Victor, pleases me with more than all those wonders. The mountains of Switzerland are more majestic and strange, but there is a charm in the banks of this divine river that I never before saw equaled. Look at that castle which overhangs yon precipice, and also on the island, almost concealed amongst the foliage of those lovely trees, and now that group of laborers coming from among their vines, and that village half hid in the recess of the mountain. Oh, surely the spirit that inhabits and surely the spirit that inhabits and guards that place has a soul more in harmony with man. Oh, surely the spirit that inhabits and guards this place has a soul more in harmony with man than those who pile the glacier or return to the inaccessible peaks of the mountains of our own country. Clerval, beloved friend, even now it delights me to record your words, and to dwell on the praise of which you are so eminently deserving. He was a being formed in the very poetry of nature. His wild and enthusiastic imagination was chastened by the sensibility of his heart. His soul overflowed with ardent affections, and his friendship was of that devoted and wondrous nature that the worldly minded teach us to look for only in the imagination. But even human sympathies were not sufficient to satisfy his eager mind. The scenery of external nature, which others regard only with admiration, he loved with ardor. The sounding cataract haunted him like a passion. The sounding cataract haunted him like a passion. The tall rock, the mountain, and the deep and gloomy wood. Their colors and their forms were then to him an appetite, a feeling, and a love that had no need of a remoter charm, by thought supplied or any interest, unborrowed from the eye. That had no need of a remoter charm, by thought supplied, or any interest, unborrowed from the eye. And where now does he exist? Is this gentle and lovely being lost forever? Has this mind so replete with ideas, imaginations fanciful and magnificent, which formed a world whose existence depended on the life of its creator, has this mind perished? Does it now only exist in my memory? No, it is not thus. Your form so divinely wrought, and beaming with beauty, has decayed, but your spirit still visits and consoles your unhappy friend. Pardon this gush of sorrow. These ineffectual words are but a slight tribute
These, pardon this gush of sorrow, these ineffectual words are but a slight tribute to the unexampled worth of Henry. But they soothe my heart, overflowing with the anguish which his remembrance creates. I will proceed with my tale. Beyond Cologne, we descended to the plains of Holland, and we resolved to post the remainder of our way, for the wind was contrary, and the stream of the river was too gentle to aid us. Our journey here lost the interest arising from beautiful scenery, but we arrived in a few days at Rotterdam, whence we proceeded by sea to England. It was on a clear morning, in the latter days of December, that I first saw the white cliffs of Britain. The banks of the Thames presented a new scene. They were flat, but fertile, and almost every town was marked by the remembrance of some story. We saw Tilbury Fort, and remembered the Spanish Armada. Gravesend, Woolwich, and Greenwich, places which I had heard of even in my country. At length, we saw the numerous steeples of London, St. Paul's towering above all, and the tower famed in English history. In Chapter 18, Victor struggles to regain himself, now finally back, reseated amidst his family. And thereupon, his father calls to him, in the recognition of the mortality of himself, and of the desire to see the union between Victor and Elizabeth. While his time is short, while the father's time is short, theirs might yet be longer. Yet Victor himself is still not recovered, and in the grips of his commitment to his creation. He must yet find a way to produce his promised mate. But to do this, he must contact a natural philosopher in London. Presented with the option of lengthy correspondence or simply going there himself, he takes the latter, in hopes that he may shield his family from any consequences of his failure or delay. And when he sets out, he does not do so alone. As a matter of surprise, At the very first leg of the journey, he finds that Elizabeth arranged Clerval to join him. And in so doing, they witness while Victor is struggling against the melancholia that absorbs him. They witness the many sights and sounds of the wondrous environs around him. When finally they arrive. When finally the journey ends and they arrive. Literarily, Chapter 18 gives us a nice peek. Gives us a fine example of how to pick up from an intensely emotional and very thorough, verbose series of chapters and narration beforehand. That instead of slicing things into neat acts, or chapters that have a significant disjointed continuity, especially with little flourishes throughout to remind us that this is indeed an account recorded from and edited by the narrator. That this is just that. Where there is nothing wrong with having a discrete bundle of information for any given presentation, be it dynamic in an interactive medium or something static like this. That it can also flow. Chapter 19. London was our point of rest. We determined to remain several months in this wonderful and celebrated city. Clerval desired the intercourse of the men of genius and talent who flourished at this time, but this was with me a secondary object. I was principally occupied with the means of obtaining the information necessary for the I was principally occupied with the means of obtaining the I was principally occupied with the means of obtaining the information necessary for the completion of my promise, and quickly availed myself of the letters of introduction. And quickly availed myself of the letters of introduction that I had brought with me, addressed to the most distinguished natural philosophers. If this journey had taken place during my days of study and happiness, it would have afforded me inexpressible pleasure. But a blight had come over my existence, and I only visited these people for the sake of the information they might give me on the subject in which my interest was so terribly profound. Company was irksome to me. When alone, I could fill my mind with the sights of heaven and earth. The voice of Henry soothed me, and I could thus cheat myself into a transitory peace. But busy, uninteresting, joyous faces brought back despair to my heart. I saw now an insurmountable barrier placed between me and my fellow-men. This barrier was sealed with the blood of William and Justine, and to reflect on the events connected with those names filled my soul with anguish. But in Clerval I saw the image of my former self. He was inquisitive and anxious to gain experience and instruction. The difference of manners which he observed was to him an inexhaustible source of instruction and amusement. He was also pursuing an object he had long had in view. His design was to visit India, in the belief that he had in his knowledge of its various languages, and in the views he had taken of its society, the means of materially assisting the progress of European colonization and trade. In Britain only could he further the execution of his plan. He was forever busy, and the only check to his enjoyments was my sorrowful and dejected mind. I tried to conceal this as much as possible, that I might not debar him from the pleasures natural to one who is entering on a new scene of life. Undisturbed by any care or bitter recollection. I often refused to accompany him, alleging another engagement, that I might remain alone. I also began to collect the materials necessary for my new creation, and this was to me like the torture of single drops of water continually falling on the head. Every thought that was devoted to it was an extreme anguish, and every word that I spoke in allusion to it caused my lips to quiver and my heart to palpitate. After passing some months in London, we received a letter from a person in Scotland who had formerly been our visitor at Geneva. He mentioned the beauties of his native country, and asked us if those were not sufficient allurements to induce us to prolong our journey as far north as Perth, where he resided. Clerval eagerly desired to accept this invitation, and I, although I abhorred society, wished to view again mountains and streams, and all the wondrous works with which nature adorns her chosen dwelling places. We had arrived in England at the beginning of October, and it was now February. We accordingly determined to commence our journey towards the north at the expiration of another month. In this expedition, we did not intend to follow the great road to Edinburgh, but to visit Windsor, Oxford, Matlock, and the Cumberland Lakes. Resolving to arrive at the completion of this tour about the end of July. I packed up my chemical instruments and the materials I had collected, resolving to finish my labors in some obscure nook in the northern Highlands of Scotland. In the northern Highlands of Scotland. We quitted London on the 27th of March, and remained a few days at Windsor, rambling in its beautiful forest. This was a new scene to us mountaineers, the majestic oaks, the quantity of game, and the herds of stately deer, and the herds of stately deer, and the herds of stately deer were all novelties to us. From thence we proceeded to Oxford. As we entered this city, our minds were filled with the remembrance of the events that had transacted there more than a century and a half before. It was here that Charles I had collected his forces. This city had remained faithful to him after the whole nation had forsaken his cause to join the standard of Parliament and liberty. The memory of that unfortunate king and his companions, the amiable Falkland, the insolent Goring, his queen and son, gave a peculiar interest to every part of the city which they might be supposed to have inhabited. The spirit of elder days found a dwelling here. The spirit of elder days found a dwelling here, and we delighted to trace its footsteps. If these feelings had not found an imaginary gratification, the appearance of the city had yet in itself sufficient beauty to obtain our admiration. The colleges are ancient and picturesque. The streets are almost magnificent, and the lovely Isis which flows beside it through meadows of exquisite verdure is spread forth into a placid expanse of waters, which reflects its majestic assemblage of towers and spires and domes embosomed among aged trees. I enjoyed this scene, and yet my enjoyment was embittered both by the memory of the past and the anticipation of the future. I was formed for peaceful happiness. During my youthful days, discontent never visited my mind, and if I was ever overcome by ennui, the sight of what is beautiful in nature, or the study of what is excellent and sublime in the productions of man, could always interest my heart and communicate elasticity to my spirits. But I am a blasted tree. The bolt has entered my soul, and I felt then that I should survive to exhibit what I shall soon cease to be, a miserable spectacle of wrecked humanity, pitiable to others, and intolerable to myself. We passed a considerable period at Oxford, rambling among its environs and endeavoring to identify every spot which might relate to the most animating epoch of English history. Our little voyages of discovery were often prolonged by the successive objects that presented themselves. We visited the tomb of the illustrious Hampden, and the field on which that patriot fell. For a moment, my soul was elevated from its debasing and miserable fears, to contemplate the divine ideas of liberty and self-sacrifice, of which these sites were the monuments and remembrancers. For an instant, I dared to shake off my chains, and look around me with a free and lofty spirit, but the iron had eaten into my flesh, and I sank again, trembling and hopeless, into my miserable self. We left Oxford with a regret, and proceeded to Matlock. which was our next place of rest. The country in the neighborhood of this village resembled, to a greater degree, the scenery of Switzerland, but everything is on a lower scale, and the green hills want the crown of distant white Alps, which always attend on the piny mountains of my native country. We visited the wondrous cave and the little cabinets of natural history, where the curiosities are disposed in the same manner as in the collections of Cerveau and Chamonix. Let's see if I got that right. Not quite. Near, but not quite. Where the curiosities are disposed in the same manner as in the collections of Cerveau and Chamonix. The latter name made me tremble when pronounced by Henry. I hastened to quit Matlock, with which that terrible scene was thus associated. From Derby, still journeying northward, we passed 2 months in Cumberland and Westmoreland. I could now almost fancy myself among the Swiss mountains. The little patches of snow which yet lingered on the northern sides of the mountains, the lakes, and the dashing of the rocky streams were all familiar and dear insights to me. Here also we made some acquaintances who almost contrived to cheat me into happiness. The delight of Clerval was proportionably greater than mine. His mind expanded in the company of men of talent, and he found in his own nature greater capacities and resources than he could have imagined himself to have possessed while he associated with his inferiors. I could pass my life here, said he to me, and among these mountains I should scarcely regret Switzerland and the Rhine. But he found that a traveler's life is one that includes much pain amidst its enjoyments. His feelings are forever on the stretch, and when he begins to sink into repose, he finds himself obliged to quit that on which he rests in pleasure for something new, which again engages his attention, and which also he forsakes for other novelties. We had scarcely visited the various lakes of Cumberland and Westmoreland, and conceived an affection for some of the inhabitants, when the period of our appointment with our Scotch friend approached. And we left them to travel on. For my own part, I was not sorry. I had now neglected my promise for some time, and I feared the effects of the daemon's disappointment. He might remain in Switzerland and wreak his vengeance on my relatives. This idea pursued me and tormented me at every moment from which I might otherwise have snatched repose and peace. I waited for my letters with feverish impatience. If they were delayed, I was miserable and overcome by 1,000 fears, and when they arrived, and I saw the superscription of Elizabeth or my father, I hardly dared to read and ascertain my fate. Sometimes I thought that the fiend followed me, and might expedite my reminiscences by murdering my companion, and might expedite my remissness by murdering my companion. When these thoughts possessed me,
I would not quit Henry for a moment, but followed him as his shadow, to protect him from the fancied rage of his destroyer. I felt as if I had committed some great crime, the consciousness of which haunted me. I was guiltless, but I had indeed drawn down a horrible curse upon my head, as mortal as that of crime. I visited Edinburgh with languid eyes and mind, and yet that city might have interested the most unfortunate being. Clerval did not like it so well at Oxford, for the antiquity of the latter city was more pleasing to him, but the beauty and regularity of the new town of Edinburgh, its romantic castle, and its environs, the most delightful in the world, Arthur's Seat, St. Bernard's Well, and the Pentland Hills compensated him for the change, and filled him with cheerfulness and admiration. But I was impatient to arrive at the termination of my journey. We left Edinburgh in a week. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I feel like it's probably Edinburgh. Yep. Okay, let's see how far back I have to go. I hope not too terribly. Oh, thank fuck. It's only 3 pages back. In this expedition, we did not intend to follow the great road to Edinburgh, but to visit Windsor, Oxford, Matlock, and the Cumberland Lakes, resolving to arrive at the completion of this tour about the end of July. I packed up my chemical instruments and the materials I had collected, resolving to finish my labors in some obscure nook in the northern highlands of Scotland. We quitted London on the 27th of March, and remained a few days at Windsor, rambling in its beautiful forest. This was a new scene to us mountaineers. The majestic oaks, the quantity of game, and the herds of stately deer were all novelties to us. From thence we proceeded to Oxford. As we entered this city, our minds were filled with the remembrance of the events that had been transacted there more than a century and a half before. It was here that Charles I had collected his forces. This city had remained faithful to him, after the whole nation had forsaken his cause to join the standard of Parliament and liberty. The memory of that unfortunate king and his companions, the amiable Falkland, the insolent Goring, his queen and son, gave a peculiar interest to every part of the city which they might be supposed to have inhabited. The spirit of elder days found a dwelling here, and we delighted to trace its footsteps. If these feelings had not found an imaginary gratification, the appearance of the city had yet in itself sufficient beauty to obtain our admiration. The colleges are ancient and picturesque, the streets are almost magnificent, and the lovely Isis, which flows beside it through meadows of exquisite verdure, is spread forth into a placid expanse of waters, which reflects its majestic assemblage of towers and spires and domes embosomed among aged trees. I enjoyed this scene, and yet my enjoyment was embittered both by the memory of the past and the anticipation of the future. I was formed for peaceful happiness. During my youthful days, discontent never visited my mind, and if I was ever overcome by ennui, the sight of what is beautiful in nature, or the study of what is excellent and sublime in the productions of man, could always interest my heart and communicate elasticity to my spirits. But I am a blasted tree. The bolt has entered my soul, and I felt then that I should survive to exhibit what I shall soon cease to be, a miserable spectacle of wrecked humanity, pitiable to others, and intolerable to myself. We passed a considerable period at Oxford, rambling among its environs, and endeavoring to identify every spot which might relate to the most animating epoch of English history. Our little voyages of discovery were often prolonged by the successive objects that presented themselves. We visited the tomb of the illustrious Hampden, and the fields on which that patriot fell. For a moment, my soul was elevated from its debasing and miserable fears to contemplate the divine ideas of liberty and self-sacrifice, of which these sites were the monuments and the remembrancers. For an instant, I dared to shake off my chains and look around me with a free and lofty spirit. But the iron had eaten into my flesh, and I sank again, trembling and hopeless, into my miserable self. We left Oxford with regret, and proceeded to Matlock, which was our next place of rest. The country in the neighborhood of this village resembled, to a greater degree, the scenery of Switzerland, but everything is on a lower scale, and the green hills want the crown of distant white Alps, which always attend on the piny mountains of my native country. We visited the wondrous cave and the little cabinets of natural history, where the curiosities are disposed in the same manner as in the collections at Sir Vaux. Where the curiosities are disposed of in the same manner as in the collections at Sir Vaux. Let's see if that's right. Cool. Where the little curiosities are disposed in the same manner as in the collections at Sir Vaux and Chamonix. The latter name made me tremble. The latter name made me tremble when pronounced by Henry, and I hastened to quit Matlock, with which that terrible scene was thus associated. From Derby, still journeying northward, we passed 2 months in Cumberland and Westmoreland. See if that's pronounced as such. Good. I could now almost fancy myself among the Swiss mountains. The little patches of snow which yet lingered on the northern sides of the mountains, the lakes, and the dashing of the rocky streams were all familiar and dear sights to me. Here also we made some acquaintances, who almost contrived to cheat me into happiness. The delight of Clerval was proportionably greater than mine, His mind expanded in the company of men of talent, and he found in his own nature greater capacities and resources than he could have imagined himself to have possessed while he associated with his inferiors. "I could pass my life here," said he to me, "and among these mountains I should scarcely regret Switzerland and the Rhine." But he found that a traveler's life is one that includes much pain amidst its enjoyments. His feelings are forever on the stretch, and when he begins to sink into repose, he finds himself obliged to quit that on which he rests in pleasure for something new, which again engages his attention, and which also he forsakes for other novelties, and which also he forsakes for other novelties. We had scarcely visited the various lakes of Cumberland and Westmoreland, and conceived an affection for some of the inhabitants, when the period of our appointment with our Scotch friend approached, and we left them to travel on. For my own part, I was not sorry. I had now neglected my promise for some time, and I feared the effects of the daemon's disappointment. He might remain in Switzerland and wreak his vengeance on my relatives. This idea pursued me and tormented me at every moment from which I might otherwise have snatched repose and peace. I waited for my letters with feverish impatience. If they were delayed, I was miserable and overcome by 1,000 fears, and when they arrived, and I saw the superscription of Elizabeth or my father, I hardly dared to read and ascertain my fate. Sometimes I thought that the fiend followed me, and might expedite my remissness by murdering my companion. When these thoughts possessed me, I would not quit Henry for a moment, but followed him as his shadow, to protect him from the fancied rage of his destroyer. I felt as if I had committed some great crime, the consciousness of which haunted me. I was guiltless, but I had indeed drawn down a horrible curse upon my head, as mortal as that of crime. I visited Edinburgh with languid eyes and mind, and yet that city might have interested the most unfortunate being. Clerval did not like it so well as Oxford, for the antiquity of the latter city was more pleasing to him. But the beauty and regularity of the new town of Edinburgh, its romantic castle, and its environs, the most delightful in the world, Arthur's Seat, St. Bernard's Well, and the Pentland Hills, compensated him for the change, and filled him with cheerfulness and admiration. But I was impatient to arrive at the termination of my journey. We left Edinburgh in a week, passing through Coupar. That sounds French? No, not far off at all. In fact, dead on. We left Edinburgh in a week, passing through Coupar, St. Andrews, and along the banks of the Tay, to Perth, where our friends expected us. But I was in no mood to laugh and talk with strangers, or enter into their feelings or plans with the good humor expected from a guest, and accordingly I told Clerval that I wished to make the tour of Scotland alone. Do you, said I, enjoy yourself? Do you, said I, enjoy yourself, and let this be our rendezvous? In a car at the final stretch. Awesome. Well, there's certainly worse things. Ah, and there we finally are. Do you, said I, enjoy yourself, and let this be our rendezvous? I may be absent a month or two, but do not interfere with my motions, I entreat you. Leave me to peace and solitude for a short time, and when I return, I hope it will be with a lighter heart, more congenial to your own temper. Henry wished to dissuade me, but seeing me bent on this plan, ceased to remonstrate. He entreated me to write often. I had rather be with you, he said, in your solitary rambles, than with these Scotch people, whom I do not know. Hasten then, my dear friend, to return, that I may again feel myself somewhat at home, which I cannot do in your absence. Having parted from my friend, I determined to visit some remote spot of Scotland and finish my work in solitude. I did not doubt but that the monster followed me, and would discover himself to me when I should have finished, that he might receive his companion. With this resolution, I traversed the northern highlands, and fixed on one of the remotest of the Orkneys at the scene of my labors. It was a place fitted for such a work, being hardly more than a rock, whose high sides were continually beaten upon by the waves. The soil was barren, scarcely affording pasture for a few miserable cows, and oatmeal for its inhabitants, which consisted of 5 persons, whose gaunt and scraggy limbs gave tokens of their miserable fare. Vegetables and bread, when they indulged in such luxuries, and even fresh water, was to be procured from the mainland, which was about 5 miles distant. On the whole island there were but 3 miserable huts, and one of them was vacant when I arrived. This I hired. It contained but 2 rooms, and these exhibited all the squalidness of the most miserable penury. The thatch had fallen in, the walls were unplastered, and the door was off its hinges. I ordered it to be repaired, bought some furniture, and took possession, an incident which would doubtless have occasioned some surprise, had not all the senses of the cottagers been benumbed by want and squalid poverty. As this was, I lived ungazed and unmolested, hardly thanked for the pittance of food and clothes which I gave, so much did suffering blunt even the coarsest sensations of men. In this retreat I devoted the morning to labor, but in the evening, when the weather permitted, I walked on the stony beach of the sea to listen to the waves as they roared and dashed at my feet. It was a monotonous, yet ever-changing scene. I thought of Switzerland. It was far different from this desolate and appalling landscape. Its hills are covered with vines, and its cottages are scattered thickly in the plains. Its fair lakes reflected blue,
Its fair lakes reflect a blue and gentle sky, and when troubled by the winds, their tumult is but as the play of a lively infant when compared to the roarings of the giant ocean. In this manner, I distributed my occupations when I first arrived, but as I proceeded in my labor, it became every day more horrible and irksome to me. Sometimes I could not prevail on myself to enter my laboratory for several days, and at other times I toiled day and night in order to complete my work. It was indeed a filthy process in which I was engaged. During my first experiment, a kind of enthusiastic frenzy had blinded me to the horror of my employment. A kind of enthusiastic frenzy had blinded me to the horror of my employment. My mind was intently fixed on the consummation of my labor, and my eyes were shut to the horror of my proceedings. But now I went to it in cold blood, and my heart often sickened at the work of my hands. Thus situated, employed in the most detestable occupation, immersed in a solitude where nothing could for an instant call my attention from the actual scene in which I was engaged, my spirits became unequal. I grew restless and nervous. Every moment I feared to meet my persecutor. Sometimes I sat with my eyes fixed on the ground, fearing to raise them, lest they should encounter the object which I so much dreaded to behold. I feared to wander from the sight of my fellow creatures, lest, when alone, he should come to claim his companion. In the meantime, I worked on, and my labor was already considerably advanced. I looked towards its completion with a tremulous and eager hope which I dared not trust myself to question, but which was intermixed with obscure forebodings of evil that made my heart sicken in my bosom. In Chapter 19, Victor and Clerval continue their glorious journeys across the many plains, valleys, mountains, and rivers, going from England and eventually by invitation to Scotland. The juxtaposition of the affable and joyous Clerval held starkly against the miserable and entirely reclused Victor. Together they finally arrive in Perth. and thereafter they depart. Victor on his way to finish his detestable goal in the Orkney Isles. Small, secluded, and squalid upon his arrival, and all the while with naught to occupy him but the roarings of the ocean surrounding, and the depths of his own anxious despair. By chemistry and biology, his labors advance. Chapter 19, I believe. What's a good transition word here? Elucidates the great power of juxtaposition. Not only does it capture the antithetic dichotomy between the external world and the internal world of Victor, but also of the internal world of Clerval to Victor, and of the people around them going through their lives. Everywhere besides in the Orkneys, and them. And then finally, between those in the Orkneys, even as it says here, dehumanized through their hardship and their unenviable labors. And their unenviable labors. And how they are so much alike Victor. How much he fits into the place. Only further emphasizing the difference between those of this sort and everyone else. How the mere environment itself, alongside what people are interacting with it, alongside how people are interacting with it, can shape the entirety of a worldview. And what the material consequences are thereof. Not only does this have value, not only do all of these comparisons and contrasts have value literarily, but one can also see the politic and social commentary baked into the thing. And where you may judge for yourself, I think it's fairly accurate, even if couched in a more fantastic tale. Okay. And now as we round 2 minutes after the turn of the hour, halfway through the stream, I'll be taking a quick recess, and then we will get into Amnesia proper. Hey, not a bad lineup. And let's pull things back over. Excellent. Okay. Now, with any good fortune, we will be able to continue recording directly from the game. Yes, excellent. All right. And our cropping is still where it needs to be. Now, if the game does not auto-quit, perfect. All right. And immediately with the crawling critters. Now, we should be starting back up at the transept.
How much more, Baron? How much more am I supposed to withstand? Kill me already! Kill me! This one. Prepare him.
Who would he have been talking to? Oh. Stand in the way of the door that I myself am trying to open. Strong start to the game. What did we have the flare for? Ugh. Do not enjoy the sawing and cawing. Yeesh. What? You needed an instruction set? Of all the things. Oof. The rapist hanged upside down, his tears soiled, the blood flooding from his belly. The saw between his legs had lodged itself in the hip and wouldn't move any further. The men stepped back and waited for the victim to drain. That's great! I'm beginning to wonder, considering it's not mere canisters at this point, we can tell. I'm gonna get stuck back here, aren't I? But really any object can apparently hold these memories, visions. I don't believe there's yet been any explanation for it, but it would seem to track. That any sufficiently emotionally charged area in the old convention can effectively function as a recording device. We don't just see this in the white screening writings, which appear to overtake one's vision, but also in the voices and narrations that crop up here and there. What have we here? Instruction manual numero dos. Yeah. The weights. Miserable thing. Crumpled bowl? Didn't seem very orbular to me, but... The kidnapper sat on her knees with her hands tied behind her back. She felt her hands being lifted and her body followed. Her shoulders gave way to the weight of her own body and cracked loudly. The suspended woman cried hysterically as the men contemplated their next step. Truly dreadful. And while this game isn't new by any means, and very popular, at least by name alone, it is an interesting sight as someone coming into it for the first time properly. To see that they genuinely did their research for their torture methods.
The cradle is ready. Good. You're a man. How can you partake in this? Is he all right?
He is one of the wicked. Don't pay his lies any attention.
I'm not a bad man. It was an accident.
He set a man on fire.
It wasn't my fault. Why won't anyone listen?
That's horrible. Of course. We are dealing with monsters here.
Monsters, monsters. I...
No, please. I'll do anything. Whatever you want. Anything. I'll do anything. I'm innocent.
There's not yet been any of these torture methods that I'm unfamiliar with, just because it's one of those pop things that you encounter when people start to talk about, like, oh, the medieval period and back were some crazy times. But this one is probably the least pleasant I know of. The arsonist kept crying as he was slowly lowered on and off the impaler. It didn't take much to break him. They had meant for him to die, but the torture was working beyond their expectations. It wasn't the method. It was the arsonist. He was different from the others. They could make him forget again. Forget? I guess that he was being impaled. Curious that the orb's pieces would be here. Well, that's all three anyway. I'm sure that will come mighty in handy later. Man, these earthquakes, eh? They really had their decor down in this part. Now, why do we have this delightful wrought iron, question mark, staircase, and yet the giant one from around Agrippa's area couldn't have been, you know, as well put together? There's nothing structurally wrong with all of this, and on top of that, it has its decor down. What have we here? More oil, thank you very much. If you would kindly. Just some string? Is it that magic of an object for us to need? Maybe. Notes on torture. There are quite a few things to be said about torture. I had figured that the reaction I would get from the victims would be highly individual. Thankfully, this is not the case. The humans all have a very similar approach to dealing with physical pain and the terror of anticipation. I cannot stress enough the importance of restraining the victims before proceeding. Even the most timid creature can break out in fits of violence where their strength exceeds their expected prowess. If proper care has been put into breaking the victim, this should not be a problem, but it will also hinder the effect I am after. The right steps to take are, therefore, to restrain the victim, while the victim is still dazed, preceded by presenting the form of the torture you are about to apply, and then to continue with the actual act. The point of the presentation is to infuse terror. The human mind is extremely efficient, as it will trigger itself into far greater fears simply by imagining it. When applying pain, make sure to avoid massive damage, as it will prove more efficient if the process can be sustained. Also apply the pain in doses, if possible, with breaks to let the body settle. If you are whipping or cutting the victim, strike once, wait for the pain to subdue, then strike again. As long as the body suffers, it will continue to produce the vitae and saturate the blood with its properties. Only with careful performance will the victim yield maximum effect. If the victim doesn't behave as expected, it is likely that all will be for naught. Before this happens, feed them the amnesia drink and try again later. So not only do we have an explanation for why torture is everywhere and the apparent primary focus of this whole castle and organization, but why the Order of the Black Eagle perhaps exists, and also how we managed to dose ourselves as Daniel, the character here, in the first place. Curious. Alright. Now for another memory jar. Is it you, my love, I miss the most, or is it perhaps myself? I know what I have become. I am not blind. I'm a monster to them, a demonic sultan perched on a dark mountaintop. There's little I can do to redeem myself. The Black Eagle fears me, and after Napoleon's defeat, it is only a matter of time before they will demand my head on a platter. I must remove myself from this land. This time, it must work. If I can't return home now, I shall perish. A less than ideal circumstance indeed. What have we here? I have a feeling you will be useful later. Can't do anything with you, yeah? No, nothing to interact on. Let's see if that yields anything of significance later. Back to the nave, then. Why am I walking like I have a limp? Is Daniel Pimp running this whole time? Well, I suppose of all the places to begin, this would be it. Damascus rose oil. I don't know of it having any significant effects. Ah, yeah, the monster, the water creature. Well, let's see, what do I need? Notes. That would not be it. Diaries? No. Not mementos for sure. Well, we got the Kark. That's secretion. I've got the fungi. And I think it's the vitae I'm still... Oh. Yep, that's the tempter fungus. What am I missing then? I'm pretty sure this leads down to the torture hall, like the ritual torture hall. Have I not been in here? Or did the game reset? Yeah, I've definitely been here, because I remember that line specifically. Yeah, that's the choir, okay. Incidentally, I did look up the names of all of these terms unfamiliar to me, and in fact, they are all relations of various portions of a church. Which gives us an additional series of themes to engage with here. That this is all a dark, dark church. Green, blue flame. Giant room. Yeah, I don't think I've seen this section yet. That is really incredible. We just went from medieval style castle to straight up D&D dungeon. Literal dungeon, game dungeon. Between the music, the aesthetic thanks to the lighting, scope, and scale of this place, and architecture.
It's like Orpheus descending into the underworld.
Are you hiding something?
What do you mean?
Never mind. Your intuition is remarkable.
I'm not sure I'm following.
It doesn't matter. It's just a myth after all.
Yikes. Oh shit. Did he just smash straight through it, no problem? Not even a moment of hesitation. I hope he doesn't follow through.
These cells are meant to hold prisoners who are under treatment. The people you send for will end up here. Remember that the confinement itself works as a preamble to the torture, and you should pace yourself. Don't take anyone before they are ready.
Understood.
Sounds from the torture chambers are shuttled in through those pipes in the ceiling. Manage your victims well, and let one prisoner's pain instill terror in his cellmate.
Well, that would explain the pipe we saw earlier. I guess it would exist in the writing chamber for the purpose of letting the torturer know that things are going well enough. Now, I'm quite sure that I've seen through this area before, but I suppose it wouldn't hurt to take a second look. For which I would have sworn that I had lit several of these torches. Yep, okay. I thought this was the same place we saw the skull cloud, but... Anywho, the final point I was going to make was the styling of the architecture. Everything assembles together to create a perfect image of exactly as was said, Orpheus stepping into the underworld. Ah, more gears. Did they just embed the gears in the board? There's not a hint of a nail? A fastener? I guarantee they ain't got no command hooks behind there. They just straight up glued them on. Incredible. After the praise that I delivered to all of this, it must be. There's no other possible explanation that this was an inside joke for the devs.
12th of August, 1839. Banishment ritual is taking longer than expected, and we have to do what is needed.
I spend my time helping out the prisoners. Being around these degenerates makes me ill. None of them even tries to face their punishment with any kind of dignity. They taunt me with their lies of innocence and their cowardly pleas of mercy. What can make a man fall so far from the grace of a civilized existence? They are all wicked men, and I remind myself of it constantly. Still, I am thankful for God sending these monsters our way, as they will serve as the instruments of my salvation. I try to study the different tools in the torture chamber and learn how to use them effectively. Last time was messy, and the effect suffered from my inexperience. When the next warding is to be performed, I shall be ready.
Well, he persuaded him thoroughly. Seems that all of the indoctrination is going quite well. Alright. The shattered orb. All is lost. I must once again start over. Ever since I recovered the orb first found by Agrippa, I've depended on it for my research. The incident with Wilhelm made me most impetuous. Fearing a paucity of prisoners, I proceeded with the final ritual without proper foresight. The orb cracked and fell into 6 parts. I've tried everything, but have yet to mend the thing. Unless I can think of a way to piece it together, I will have to find another. There is still life in the pieces, and even if the orb isn't restored, I might be able to salvage some of its power for some other purpose. Centuries have passed in vain, and I begin to wonder if I will ever be able to see my love again. How much longer can I sustain my life? No lie, that has very significant Saint Germain vibes from Castlevania, the animated series. What unusually intricate arrangements. I don't think that we remain on the material plane. I had to take a moment to pause and listen to this audio, because I thought I had heard one. There it is. I don't know specifically why, but I had heard it a few times in other horror games. And that kind of, if it were an image, it would be almost like a bit crush effect, I think is the term for it, where the audio stream is so compressed, but it is algorithmically maintained in tone, that it has that kind of almost particulated sound to it. It's such a potent addition to the menagerie of drones and wisps. Close. That it perfectly encapsulates this otherworldliness. Now, if I touch this, it's gonna deal damage, yeah? Yeah, that's what I thought. And push back by 5 feet. Oh, I love that. I love that so much. What if I touch it? Will it insta-kill me? Nope, but it will do the same damage. Ooh, and quite a bit of it as well. Well, let's come back to that later. Congratulations to me.
Is this ill time of missing then? If so, blame yourself. You started this.
You brought me here. What you mean?
And this is how you repay me? How dare you?
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I just came here with an interesting ball. You decided that this was the greatest time ever to get a new apprentice in your dark, evil magician rituals. I just wanted a place to be. Well, let's see. Where, oh where can I get that? Vitae. Yeah, I'm trying. Right. I'm trying, buddy. No. We'll not do that. I just need that Vitae. Gimme. Now, there's got to be one of these rooms that can offer me some aid. Because once I have that orb, I'm sure that the path will calm down and let me go through. Oh, the body's disappeared. Curious. I believe I've hit another impasse. I really hope this doesn't turn into an egg hunt. I've been here before. Gonna pop open again? No. Okay. I think it was in here that I found one of the orb pieces. But I am at quite the inconvenient moment. If I elect to sign with my pride, then I may spend another exceeding span of time trying to figure out where I might have made a misstep. But I will at least have enjoyed the experience, to a degree. But it'll all be areas that I've been through before, so there's no new commentary to be had on them. Would that be more entertaining? Methinks not. I'll give this a brief go. But if I do not make some pretty hasty progress, I think that I'll spare it. Does this just go on forever? Or what if I spin it the other way? I see a purple light over there. Is that another orb piece? Yes, sir, it is! Alright. Well, that gives us some direction at least. Gonna need more tinderboxes soon. I was wondering why these places felt relative... What? These places felt a little bit empty. Did I loop back around? And is that a creature? Nah, it's just fog. Okay. Don't look at him. Yep, 100% did a loop. Maybe this big central block is one of those doors. I know I haven't passed by one of them, most certainly, because that's where I found the fungus. And I think I might have crossed it again. Very nice. Now, wherefore is that orb piece? And once we find this, whereabouts all of that vitae distilled blood? Oh shit. Hey, there we are. Would you look at that, fellas? They cut a bull out of copper and tin. Anything in there? You're gonna have a barbecue and you're not even gonna let me in? Ah, come on, buddies. Well, let's see if we can get a sneak peek anyway. Just smoke. There's no way to bust that open, is there? Huh? Yeah, a little bit of... nope. Okay. No chance, okay. And none of these do any such. Okay. Ah, yes, I forgot that this pillar is fallen right over. Come on. Done this a million times before. I didn't think about it before, but that's an interesting juxtaposition. Now, just to be safe. No, I didn't think so. Nice. Well, onward and upward in any case. Bonerific! That's really... Huh. That rings really strong. All of these remains tumbling down to suddenly coat the area. Of an exact happenstance in the quest for unknown Kadat. Particularly in the underworld, all of the ghouls and such dwell. Now, where can I find that vitae? We've gotten plenty of other objects from this area. So that would suppose that the others to include such are probably elsewhere. Okay. Hmm? No. Oops. It had certainly felt like the other office was lacking in things to pick up. Whenever we were going... Oh no! Reality is so enreddened. Whatever will I do? That's just moldy bread. Okay. Yeah, I don't think there'd be anything in here since these were just for confinement. Try the chancel again. We would at least be sure that we have all the orb pieces. My vision! It's gone horizontal! Oh shit! Oh fuck! Ah fuck! God damn! Ah yeah, I'll go to sleep real easy after that. They faked me out and then actually did the thing. Shit! Was this intentional? Never had this shit happen before. Oh, I guess the answer is yes. Did he just fucking mock me? No way.
You had me worried. Quite frankly, I'm not sure what to do with you. I hold no grudge against you, Daniel. We are so very much the same, you and I. Did you
Right.
drink from the amnesia mixture? It does explain so much of your behavior. You never did finish what you set out to do. You talked about redemption, how you would face the orb's shadow and save our work, and me. I will grant you another chance to redeem yourself. You can wait here and stop the shadow. Thank you, friend.
Wait here and stop the shadow. Okay. I don't think that will suffice, but you keep telling yourself that. String? Chisel? Busted bar, locked door. We've got this bed frame. And an end table. This section appears a little cracked. But then all of this stonework is not exactly in good repair. Can't forget the bucket. That will become perfectly lodged. Ah, what have we here? I don't think that's of any immediate use, but I'll keep that in mind, that we can do it. Okay, then. Can I do anything with this? I shouldn't imagine the answer is literally just to sit and wait. That make a metallic clink? Yeah, okay. I wouldn't have thought so. I can't hammer and chisel you, can I? No, not a chance. Well, I do have a lantern. Can't light anything on fire. How about some Icorish? No. I'm well and certainly at a loss. Orb pieces wouldn't do anything, I'm sure. Well, I guess that leaves us with one last hope. And what a hope it was. Oh! Well, that gives us something at least. Now, what can I do with it? Can't break the table apart, I suppose. No. Oh, awesome. Can't just... Oh! It really was that easy. For real? Okay. I thought for sure there would be more to it. Well, now that we're out of a cell, let's get back into one. Don't know what we'd need to go back there for, but well enough. Hello? I guess it's latched there. That it? Would that help? Could we just directly put a bucket to it? Does this have any purpose at all? I'm sure it will in time. Ooh, a letter. Last prisoner note. There's little left to say. I write solely to prevent myself from revisiting the memories of these last few days. If I am fortunate, I will fall asleep and time will pass without effort. I've begun to wean myself of my prison. When I first arrived, I felt like I was being buried inside a tomb, but now I feel the close walls comforting me. As long as I am in here, there is no pain. The walls protect me from the outside. I even laughed earlier as one of my wardens dropped a key down the pipes. It gave me hope for a second, thinking I would escape if only I could somehow reach it from here. In my dreams, Alexander, I am king. In my dreams, I best you and escape your clutches and return with all the knights of the realm, carrying pistols and sabers. In my dreams. What dreams to have. Oh. Oh. Okay. What the hell? Well, at least we got a tinderbox out of it. My man just appeared out of nowheres. I can't do anything with him, I guess. Nope. Well, what if I, Nope. No, okay. Ah, more laudanum. A welcome reprieve. And another tinderbox on top of it. Lucky day. Come on, then. And is that glowing? It surely is. Quite the mixture to have there. Ah, yes. Bucketception. Now, this is locked, I guarantee. Yep. And is this going to get us, the key that was foresaid? Maybe. Thanks. Glad to know you don't trust me, asshole. What if our guy here is just a wee bit thirsty? Let's, No, okay. Bucket of water. To what end? I don't imagine wetting the business here would be of any Aid. Pipes, perhaps? Well, I wouldn't think it to extinguish the torches, okay. Oh, that is a terrible bit of design. Yeesh, clipping right through. What is that? Just the end of something? Ah, okay, so it is just a bit of lumber. Well... Well, I can see no other reason, aside from grabbing that, Mr. Deadly is over here. What if we poisoned, boned, stringed, barred, barred, water. Nope, okay. Nothing we got right now makes him relevant.
Get away! You shouldn't do that!
I do what I want. Maybe if we just jiggle the handle a few good times. It worked for the prison door. Oh, that's awesome. Little laughing hinge we have here. Well, I don't imagine this will work, but we might as well try. You mean it would... Oh. So we have something... I guess not, okay. String? Hammer and chisel? Bars? I mean, my personal answer... That is such an odd shape. A cylinder of stone, round stone bricks, forming a lintel. Don't think I appreciate that very much. Me too. I still haven't the foggiest idea of what exactly a bucket of water would be useful for here. What? This pipe, the busted one here. Hang on. Did I bean boozle myself? Okay. Puzzle games. Well, through sheer trial and error, at least, we found it. Okay. Come on. Move it. Groove it. Scoot it. Boot it. Ooh, boy. Left, right. That's got a... not a good look, not a good look, not a good look. The other way. Not a very desirous, appearance here. No. I would prefer to remain this shade, thank you very much. I think you can keep your redshift all the way back there. Thank you kindly. And in fact, now that I'm here at the end, I'll leave you behind. Your redolence is not appreciated. Now what Oh, a new well creature. Now what happens if I go back? Okay. I'm glad they had an idea of what... that somebody might try it. What have we here? A letter that brings me to my knees. Awesome. To pass out again?
Of August, 1839. Tonight, we will unlock the power of the orb and ultimately banish the shadow hunting me. I feel it closing in on me, and I fear for my life more than ever. Just outside Altstadt lies a small settlement where Zimmerman, a dairy farmer, lives with his wife and 3 children. Took the coach, went there. Our visit was unexpected, and Alexander was able to strike Zimmerman down without alerting the others. As he went to take care of the farmhands, I began to look for the children. We should have more than enough prisoners to finish the ritual now.
So much for only being criminals and the like. And more rose petals. Damascus rose. I have got to look it up later. More string. More bars. No, okay. You will come in handy, though, I'm sure.
Another redshift.
I'm actually inclined to take those more seriously now that, we almost got plane swapped. Man, what a mess! Glad I'm not gonna be the one to clean that up. Hello? Thank you. Guess I would just have to sprint across, huh? Okay, well, here we go. Push, push, push. I guess I could duck under it. Okay. This is surely not the way back down to Agrippa. Perhaps it is. Oh, hell. Glad I got all that laudanum earlier. Otherwise, I'd be in a bad way. A grinder of some description? Would this... Okay. How about this? And a jar to hold it. Never mind, then. I had thought so. I guess a different container will be needed. Or perhaps this. Okay. Alright, different containers for everything, then I suppose. At least this answers how I'm supposed to get all of these materials. Well, so much for Agrippa. If there was a way to save him, I'll have to assume that I made the wrong steps before then. In any event, I can I believe that. I must take another brief recess, so I'll be right back. Not too bad in the lineup. Let's correct that just a bit. There we go. So... Oh, wrong scene. I just took a quick peek because I was curious enough about it, and it seems like it would have been possible to save Agrippa, but I had missed a means of acquiring the blood before triggering the event. Such that it is now no longer an option. Even if I wanted to, all of these regions are positively inaccessible by this point. Poor fellow. Hmm? I'll certainly have to, on my own time, look up what would have happened if I did save him, because I was well in the progress of it, but just a few essential bits missing. Apparently I could have gotten the blood from a place called the Saw Room. Okay. Yeah, I didn't figure that would do. Maybe some progress there. Nope, I don't think that'll work. Okay, so... Iron bar? Nope. Perhaps there is something to do with his remains over here. Nope. String? Not a chance. There must be a key, then. The question is, where would I find such a small item here? Probably just like the blood, I overlooked it. Of all the places for the goop to wrap itself around, I'm surprised. Ah, there we are. That it didn't get into any of the confinement rooms. And there we are again. Well and good. Aha! My search was not in vain. And another. Yeah, that would probably be the safest option. It's got Gore's spirits. I certainly wouldn't want that for myself, that's for sure. I've got to wonder about that locked door, though. Not getting out through there, that's for sure. Yahoo! Yeah. Well, I guess I should check the side passages. I did for the confinement room. I might as well be somewhat thorough. Ooh, never mind. I'll leave that for another time. And I don't think I'm gonna be able to get over there. Well, let's, will he see me? And if he does, will he be able to keep me? Ah, very good. Went exactly where I hoped he would. Alright, what have we over here? Another letter?
1839. I cannot believe what I have become. One of the girls escaped and I chased after her all the way upstairs. I hunted her down and... What is her life worth? How many lives can I take before I surrender my own? Sure, I would kill a murderer to save an innocent. But to kill an innocent to save myself? A cold-blooded murderer.
So that's what it takes to give you a conscience. A little bit late. Could've used that a bit earlier on, we'll say. And now to the machine room. It's a lovely pearlescence. Well, that's probably what the iron bar is for, yeah? No, can't cram that in there? Alright, well... Of all the times to have a bucket of water, I suppose this would be it. Yeah, okay. At least I was on the right path. Perhaps this will do. That it will. Now, what did that halt, is the question. I imagine it probably doesn't have any relation to anything out there. Maybe the spinning? The electricity generation, mayhaps? I'd say so. Well, there's our orb. Hmm? Onward and upward, then. Now I'm quite concerned. Given that I didn't get that blood, and clearly there was a way to make that potion, I feel like there's going to be some ill consequence to not having done so. I suppose that will do. In widen. Alright. What have we done then? I guess we'll find out later then. Ah, hello there, completely nobody. Well, no matter whether you are frequent or not, it is good to see you anyhow.
19th of August, 1839. It's not fair. I'm not to blame. I've been manipulated by that demon. He played my guilty conscience and duped me into facing the shadow alone. That vile, conspiring man. He expects me to meet my death as he steals power beyond imagination? Alexander, I will kill you for what you have done. If only the shadow had caught me in London or Algeria, I wouldn't have to suffer this humiliation. You made me a murderer, a monster. And now, I merely await my death. I am too weak to press on. I can hardly stand as my knees fail me. I cannot see as my eyes are dressed in tears. I am as broken as the men I've tortured. If only I could wipe my fear away, as we did with them.
These are dark matters indeed. Well, completely nobody. Well, this is loading in. I do hope that your situations continue to improve, both in work.
To see you filled with such hate. Is vengeance really what you seek? I hoped you, of all people, could appreciate the grave nature of the situation. After all, it's always been your life we were fighting for. Isn't it worth a little sacrifice? Come, help me finish the ritual. There's still time before the shadow catches up with you.
Yeah, I think I'll pass on that. But yes, I do hope that everything continues to improve. Would this finally be the time to use these? Yeah, I didn't think so. There we go.
I realize you doubt my intentions. Why would I take such extreme measures to save your life? Maybe I'm saving mine too. Stop it, Henry. You are ruining it. We are so close, I beg you. I'm just like you, Daniel. A prisoner of circumstance, trapped in a world I no longer recognize. As you gain your freedom, will you deny me mine?
Yeah, pretty much.
Closer, closer than I know. You killed us. You killed us both.
Yeah, good.
It was my greatest triumph, and I never looked back.
As I try to look back.
You think I was afraid fleeing Brennenburg? Huh, quite the contrary. I knew it was my purgatory, hellfire made to wash away my sins. There's no denying the things I've done, but I have paid my tribute. I gave them that awful man. I did the right thing.
And that's all she wrote. Well, let's see. While we didn't get to save Agrippa, we did save ourselves and take care of Alexander at the same time. Considering that Daniel was just a hapless individual who found himself here not so very different as he pointed out in his own letters at the end there, to those whom he tortured and killed. They were all contorted and warped, all for the purpose of the grander scheme of endless power. And finally, at the termination of it all it took was pushing over a few pylons. In my time with this game, experiencing it for the first time, I find that the entire experience is just as satisfying as I had heard it said to be. While there was certainly a great deal of trials and tribulations, as you would expect out of it, and some befuddlement and puzzlement that I think is just a consequence of the genre. The inheritance of puzzles and puzzle games. The aesthetic remained mostly consistent through and through. In every front, from visual to audio to mechanic. The UI and mechanics remained perfectly serviceable. Nothing really to praise highly or critique significantly. And the entire experience had next to no bugs, with one minor exception. All in all, it's a piece that I think made strong efforts to provoke thought about sacrifice, cost, viciousness, and desire. And while it doled it out in a way that is piecemeal, I think it did so successfully, albeit in a very poetic and verbose fashion. I think that I would rate it 8 out of 10. For the time it was released in 2010, I think it has aged very well, where it does not compete exceptionally with other first-person or even third-person horror games that have come out since. It very much was a flagstone in setting the path, therefore. If I were to suggest anything that really needed some further polishing, there's just a few pieces of geometry and maybe a little bit of better signposting to make things a little bit more apparent on some of the puzzles, so that it doesn't feel like there is a bit more abstruseness or occlusion than necessary. And that's a hard balance to strike, I understand. So I wouldn't really hold it against the game, as much as I would suggest that tilting that scale, fine as it is, just slightly more in the direction of being player-friendly, would befit it perfectly. And I think that's my final thoughts on it. All right. Now, since we are sitting here at an in screen, let's see if we can at least get some background noise. And I'll turn that down a little bit since that's more background noise for me as well than I am playing it. And for my final few moments, I'll take a look over here at what nobody's been saying. He says, the Balcaron situation has taken a fun turn. The party has discovered an ancient peril nearby and have moved to secure it. The problem for them now is that because they found it, malevolent forces who have been looking for it are bound to try and take it for themselves. So now they're stuck trying to figure out what to do with it. For those of you who are unaware, that is in reference to his long-running tabletop game campaign that he has been telling us all about over in the Threefold Edifactory, and that's the Discord server, and also referencing here on the streams whenever we have stopped to converse about it. Fascinating topics. I am very interested to hear how that turns out, but as this is a very deep cut for what I think most people who are not privy to the information yet, it's a little incentive to go check out the server if you're so inclined. That will have some great significance. Should, of course, you have the context for it. And I'm interested. But, indeed, it was, as nobody says, such a good game. A very good game indeed. And one that I think that I will revisit sometime in the future. Though for now, at the end of Demand's Shadow, it is time for us to say farewell. So, let's go over to the outro cam. Exit Amnesia quite quickly. And say, I thank you all for joining me here today. If you enjoyed the stream, then I would hope most certainly that you find it worthy of a like, share, and subscribe. If you want to see more of us, you can find us over on X, Twitter, Instagram, or Spotify and BitChute, where you can find various clips and all of the updates for the channel. If you thought it worthy of a little bit more insofar as some of your hard-earned monies, we have Patreon if you'd like to be a more recurrent subscriber to the channel, or Stream Elements, as linked in the description below, where you can make a one-time donation of any amount. But without further ado, I wish you all to never miss your opportunity.